Okay, so now YouTube is they're very censorious. I don't know if that's the right word. I probably misusing that word, but they like censoring. And I you know what? I'm gonna put it this way. I don't think they do like censoring. I think they do it. I bet they wish they didn't have to, but they do it because why? They're the establishment. Google's in bed with the CIA and the security state and the the surveillance apparatus, and they run the government. It's like it doesn't go the other way. The government doesn't run Google; it goes the other way. Just like the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, big oil, they run the government. It's not the other way. So same thing with Google, right? So this guy says, who is I'll get to it. He's one of the top executives at YouTube. He says, can you find out who this guy is? I don't know why I didn't write his name down.
Okay.
YouTube executive says it's an open platform. That he says YouTube is an open platform where anyone can share ideas without gatekeepers. Now that's going to smack a lot of people. It's ridiculous. Because we all know, first of all, I have a man on the show with me, and they took down his entire YouTube career has been taken down. And a lot of that was very critical of the Russian government. So this idea without gatekeepers. Now so that's been ruffling a lot of feathers. Now let me just say this about YouTube. I'll say the good part first. YouTube is an amazing delivery platform. It's so much better than any other social media for me, anyway, especially for video. There's nothing can come close to it. And YouTube has helped me grow. Without YouTube, I wouldn't have grown this fast, and I probably wouldn't have as big an audience I have. So YouTube actually has helped me grow a lot. Now, the problem is that they need advertising revenue, right? So people who do news, we're in this era where the establishment wants to censor to control have narrative control, right? Because as we've told you before, half the country lives in poverty. 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 91 million Americans have no health insurance or lack thereof. Most people go bankrupt if they get cancer. So this is called what do you call a system that takes the world's richest country and does that? You call that a failed system. So we're in a failed system, right? So the establishment has to have narrative control, so they censor, right? So they did that around COVID. They do that around the war. They did that around Syria. They do around no matter what it is that they need to control it. So that guy's name is Neal Mohan. He's the chief product officer at YouTube. And so he says YouTube. So in a sense, what he meant by this, I didn't ask him, but this is what I'm going to show you the video of him saying it. What I think he means by this is that I don't have to go to an executive at HBO or ABC or CNN to get a TV show. I can just start broadcasting and find an audience, and that's what he meant. Of course, YouTube is a huge gatekeeper. Of course they are. Of course they've censored me. And they do it opaquely. I asked them to show me, hey, can you show me the words or give me a timestamp of what I said wrong? And they won't do it. So they're censoring in secret. And at the behest of Big Pharma. And they said it's because of health. That's bullshit. They let NBC News, and I've showed you NBC News lies over and over about COVID and vaccines and child vaccines. I've showed you that. And they're never going to censor them for that. So it's not about health. It's about Big Pharma dictating censorship, and they're part of it. It's not about your health. Don't let them. There might be people who work at Google who think that. That's not the case. All right. I was born on a weekend, not last weekend. So let's watch this video, and we'll come back and talk to Chris Hedges about it.
It's a platform where any one of us, if we have an idea, a thought to share with the world, we can do that no matter what part of the world we're from, without gatekeepers, without somebody telling us whether our idea is good or bad. And it's that open platform that actually is really the power of YouTube.
Yeah, it's the power of YouTube that it's an open platform. And then, of course, we wreck it by censoring people and not letting them, they're not just censoring jagoffs like me, a pothead comedian in his garage. They're censoring doctors, scientists. You mean like fringe crazies? No, people from like, Stanford and Harvard and Yale, those kind of people, the Great Barrington Declaration, those types of people, the people who are the most cited people in their field, they're now censoring. Okay, so there you go. All right.
And so there are lots of voices on our platform that have opinions that certainly I would disagree with, probably many people in this audience would disagree with on a regular basis. And it doesn't mean that we should remove those videos. And so while we're an open platform,
but we do. Now Chris, let me just bring you in. I'm going to play more of this, but you want to just comment on this much so far?
Well, I would love to know how he would explain YouTube's decision to erase my entire archive, 6 years of shows that I'd done on RT, not one of which was on Russia. I mean, they erased shows. It had nothing to do with, well, it probably did have something to do with content, because it was often a critique of American empire, American capitalism, American foreign policy. I did a lot of shows on Julian Assange, but none of it had to do with Russia. And there were a lot of writers. I mean, Kai Bird's biography on J. Robert Oppenheimer. I did a show with Sam Sloat, who's the James Joyce Scholar from Trinity College Dublin, on Ulysses, marking the 100th anniversary of the publication of Ulysses. Benjamin Mosier's biography on Sontag. Critics like Chomsky, Gerald Horne, Wendy Brown, Cornel West. It all went, and I think it was just so indiscriminate. But the fact that it had been put out by RT gave them a kind of license to eradicate it. And I've already been a target, as you have, through algorithms with the writing. And I think as things get worse and worse, especially as the Democrats are defeated in the way that we lose control of the House and Senate, as I think everyone, including the Democrats, expects, then their response is going to magically make critics like me disappear, as if that's going to make the problem go away.
Yes, and while I've managed to stay on YouTube, I know that the establishment will get rid of me if I ever become a real problem. So, I've just had smear articles written about me and things like that so far, when I became a little bit of a problem with Force the Vote, which exposed the faux progressive left that got elected as Justice Democrats. So let's get back to this.
We've always had this, what I would say is a kind of robust set of community guidelines, which we've had to evolve as YouTube has evolved.
So we've had a robust set of community guidelines. So let me translate that for you. We've got some strict censorship shit that's happening over there, and it's evolved. And by evolved means give even more restrictions. That's what evolved means. Evolves doesn't mean we became more liberal and more freedom of speech. No, evolves means we found more shit to censor. We became more restrictive. That's what he means by evolve.
But okay? Jimmy, I don't think not one of my shows would have violated their strict community guidelines.
No, they wouldn't have. They just said that you were Russian media, and that was that.
Yeah,
that was that.
And that's very totalitarian, where you exist one day and then you don't. But there was no inquiry, there was no notice, and the idea that unlike you, I don't swear. It's a very wonky show. I didn't violate any of their community guidelines, not one.
Right, and the community guidelines are there for people like me, to keep people like me in line, right? Okay.
And we've had to catch up in many places. And generally speaking, those community guidelines are derived from either established third-party experts that we work with, whether it's around hate speech or harassment, violent extremism, where we work with government authorities on, child safety, where we work with child advocacy and government groups on.
So he's telling you the people they consult when they're censoring. He said the government twice, that they consult when they're censoring. That's what he's talking about. Okay.
Right. Well, there's a quid pro quo. That's a very dirty quid pro quo between the Democratic Party and these giant monopolies like Facebook, YouTube, Google, Amazon. They will carry the water for the Democratic Party in terms of censoring critics from the left and the right. And in return, the Democrats won't touch their monopolies. And you have this specter of these hearings in Washington where Democratic senators are begging the CEOs of these big social media platforms to carry out more censorship. I mean, this is part of the whole perversion of the self-identified left, is that it's not that we censor, it's that we don't do enough.
Yes, so you're positing what you're saying. This is a big thing that you're saying. So you're saying that there's a reciprocal relationship between Silicon Valley, meaning Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and the Democratic Party, that they'll carry water. Well, what do you mean carry water, Chris? You mean like, let's say a laptop from the presidential candidate's son got turned up with all kind of incriminating evidence that his father, the guy running for president, was doing criminal shit in Ukraine, China, and other places, that they would suppress it for the Democratic Party? You mean that kind of stuff?
Suppress it. All they did was run around and say it was straight out of the Russian playbook, and my old employer, the New York Times, called it disinformation. But
they literally censored it, like on Twitter, the Daily.
On Twitter they censored from the New York Post, of course.
Right.
But it was a full-throated campaign, and it wasn't worth covering. Of course.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Because it was straight out of the Russian playbook.
That's right.
That's right. It's pathetic. But in the last few weeks, Silicon Valley put a lot of money. We don't know because it's all dark. A lot of money, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, into advertising for the Biden campaign. And that's why that's the deal. Nobody's going to break up these platforms, and they're going to do the dirty work for the Democrats.
Because I just did a story, Matt Stoller caught, that it's the Republicans that are the only ones right now in government pushing back with antitrust.
Yeah, that's right.
And against Silicon Valley. And I'm like, that's wild. Again, the parties, how they're flipping. So let's get back to this.
But in the realm of misinformation, where oftentimes there isn't a very, very clear authoritative source you can point to for truth, it does become fuzzier and it becomes harder. And my opinion...
Yeah, it's fuzzy. So we turn to authoritative sources. And by authoritative sources, he means incorporated sources. People should be able to share. Oh, here we go.
Is that YouTube, I and my team and YouTube shouldn't be the arbiters of the truth. And we really do try to...
Well, that's... So, again, that'll make your head spin, the way he says two things at once. It's like, of course, we have robust community guidelines, meaning robust censorship guidelines, and they get even more robust as they evolve. But we shouldn't be doing that. So he seems to be saying two things. So you want to go, oh, well, they're reasonable. He doesn't want to do it. But there they are doing it. Go ahead.
He's talking out of both sides.
That's right.
Because he's espousing these kind of free speech values. At the same time, he's admitting that there are internal mechanisms by which people are censored, and it's completely opaque. We don't know anything about the process. We know these people actually are hired out of the intelligence and the security agencies and the military, but it's not transparent. And that's why I was opposed to removing Trump from Twitter. And I was on Amy Goodman's show making that point, saying, look, you don't want to give these corporations that kind of power where they know everything about us. We know nothing about them, of course. Because they'll hardly stop there. And a few weeks later, of course, I didn't know it was coming. I was hit.
So he's trying to say that he's for free speech, and we shouldn't be doing this, and we will let authoritative people do it. It's all for safety. It's not about narrative control for the establishment or the oligarchy that owns us, or that who we are, in fact. They are the oligarchy. People should be able to share ideas, just not thumbs down, YouTube. Really? You want to have a free-flowing sharing ideas, but just not thumbs down. So people can call out bullshit when they see it from the NBC News or from the White House. They got rid of thumbs down. What is that? Talk about your commitment to sharing ideas without a gatekeeper, you bullshitters. Oh, thumbs down. That's the most dangerous form of misinformation. All right, back to this guy.
Avoid taking that position. We really try to fall back to authoritative sources.
Authoritative
when we
sources.
remove videos in terms of our policy.
So, he is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. We rely on authoritative sources. What? You know, when challenged in court, Facebook admitted that they weren't doing fact checks. Did you know that? So when they finally got a court that it had to actually present evidence, Facebook said their fact checkers aren't really fact checkers, that they're partisans with an opinion. And that's what we were telling you for years here at the Jimmy Dore Show. And then they had to go to court and admit it. And that's same thing here. He's like, well, we rely on authoritative source. You rely on corporate funded hacks to come in and censor shit that the oligarchy doesn't want said on your platform. That's what that is. Okay? All right. Why? And they say, oh, it's always because we don't want misinformation getting out there. You don't have a problem with misinformation, which is why those misinformation NBC News COVID child vaccine with the 100% wrong stats are still up at YouTube. You liars. You're not there. You don't care about saving people. You only care about your bottom line and controlling the narrative. Okay, here we go.
We factor that into how our recommendation algorithms work, as opposed to us arbitrarily trying to make those decisions.
So just so you know, the head of YouTube admitted, it's funny. So I used to have two liaisons. I have a liaison now. I have one guy that I can talk to at YouTube, which is super helpful. And he's helped my show grow. He's had great ideas, and he's an earnest fellow. I like the guy. The two people I had before him, I wanted to have an honest conversation, and I kept trying to get them to admit that there's two different algorithms, one for corporate news and one for independent news, and they're suppressing us, and I understand why. But just admit it so we can have a real conversation. And they would never admit that there was two algorithms, Chris. They would never do it. And then the last time I go, this is the last time I'll have this conversation. You just admit it that there's two. Look what's going on. I can see, look at how I used to add 30,000 subscribers a month, and now I'm down to 3,000 subscribers a month. Come on, you guys are suppressing. I know what's going on. And they're like, no, Jimmy, there's only one algorithm. There's only one algorithm. And then 2 weeks after that, the head of YouTube was interviewed, and she admitted that they had a different algorithm for independent news and a different one for reliable news sources, meaning corporate news, which is funded by the military-industrial complex, Wall Street, and Big Pharma. So he admitted it, and then I brought it up at the next meeting, and they were like, yes, that was unfortunate that she said that. So, of course, we know there's two different algorithms, which is why corporate news shows like Rising was able to grow so quickly with such shit content that nobody wanted to watch. And there's still no one watching. Go what? No one's watching that show. How did they get all those subscribers? Right? Because they were on the corporate algorithm. And now they're admitting that there's some. In fact, they even bragged, the head of YouTube, she bragged that how much they suppress the recommendations of independent news. And to them, that's suppressing misinformation. No, what you're doing is suppressing your open platform, turning it into a censored platform for the oligarchy while you boost corporate news, which is funded by the same oligarchy. The whole point of YouTube is that guys like me can come on and debunk the corporate news, and then YouTube comes on, suppresses us, and pushes corporate news.
But, that's an important point, because there's a collusion between established news organizations like CNN, Washington Post, the New York Times, because the whole idea behind the algorithms is to funnel people back into the arms of that established media, which most people are fleeing from. And so that's why part of the kind of chorus of cheerleaders for censorship comes from those very media outlets that look at independent challenges, whether that comes from you or Glenn or Matt or Max Blumenthal or anything else. They see that as a threat. They go after, I don't watch Joe Rogan. I don't know if he's any good, but he's very popular. And that's why they go after Rogan. Anybody who steps outside the perimeter that they control. And so we have to be clear that these established corporate media entities are being very proactive in pushing this kinds of censorship.
So here's the commentary they gave over at Reclaim the Net, which is a great website, so everybody should check that out. It says, so he talked about, well, we have community guidelines, and they make the point that it is precisely these guidelines that have been cited over and over again in the massive amount of YouTube strike or ban notices, as content creators are prevented precisely from having their own ideas, whether it was a doctor's or a scientist trying to discuss COVID, or journalists and commentators covering elections or current affairs. They literally, they shut down people. If you can't even mention the idea that there might have been some malfeasance in the election of Biden. You can't mention it. Meanwhile, for 5 years straight, you were able to scream from the top of your lungs on YouTube and every other social media platform that the election was stolen, and it was stolen by Russia, and that Donald Trump is actually a secret Russian and he's a traitor to our country. That was all acceptable. But you know what is not acceptable? Saying that that election was stolen from Donald Trump. You can't say that. That's not allowed. You can't posit that as a theory, or they will take it. Even people just answering questions. Primo Radical now, he was interviewing Cynthia McKinney, and they took a super chat question asking about the election and if it was stolen. They gave him a strike over that, and they took that video down. Just them answering the question. That's the kind of censoring that happens. Isn't that amazing? Like, why is it okay it was super okay, Chris, for 4 or 5 straight years to scream at the top of your lungs that election was stolen by Russia, but you're not allowed to say the same thing about the 2020 election. What do you make of that?
Well, that hypocrisy is not lost on a huge segment of the American public. I mean, I always love it when, remember, the Democrats were always furious that Trump supporters were trying to get electors to the Electoral College to vote for Trump. Well, Hillary Clinton did exactly the same thing. Exactly the same tactic. It's the Republicans. It's not defensible, but it's not defensible for the Democrats. The Republicans were just mirroring the tactics that
yes.
Clinton campaign and everyone else carried out in 2016. There's a whole campaign to get electors for Trump to vote for Clinton. So the hypocrisy is so blatant, so obvious, so pronounced, and so shameless. This is part of the whole political decay, and one of the reasons that the ruling elites, the ruling class, Democrat and Republican, is just seeing what little credibility it has left shredded. I mean, I don't know what Biden's latest approval ratings are, but they're very low. They're right down there with Congress and the press.
Yes. Bottom of the barrel. Well, Chris Hedges, thank you so much for making time, for coming on the show. Thanks for your writing. And what do you think would happen, Chris, if somebody like me ran for president as an independent? What do you think would happen?
They do to you what they did to Ralph, and that the way they destroy you, they did it to it's a tactic. And Taibbi actually writes about it. I forget Insane Clown President. They turn you into a joke. They'll turn you into a joke. That's what they'll try to do. They'll turn you into a figure of ridicule. I mean, they did that to Jeremiah Wright, who was a friend of mine, Obama's pastor, who's brilliant and eloquent, and they took a little clip and then they lynch you. I mean, they did that to me when I was booed off of a commencement stage for denouncing the war in Iraq. They pull a little clip and then they lynch you hour after hour after hour. They're pretty ruthless. So think about it.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I it's not the things that I see coming. It's the things that they're going to make up about me. And
yeah. I mean, they made up all sorts of stuff about Ralph. It was really appalling. So.
It would have been fun. It would have been funny if Ralph ran now, because they would immediately hashtag me to him, and that would be so funny.
Yeah,
that would be funny. All right, Chris Hedges. Everybody, check out his Substack, chrishedges.substack.com. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll see you soon, buddy.
Okay. Thanks, Jimmy.
Here we're doing stand-up comedy in Irvine, California, Las Vegas, San Diego, Salt Lake City, Indianapolis, Louisville, all over the place. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for tickets.